Okay, I think we're about ready to get started, everyone. So for those of you in the room, please just a little bit of housekeeping. This is a silent event, as most of them are here. Please put on your headsets. Make sure they're turned on. There's a funny little volume thing on the side that you're going to need to turn up in order to be able to hear me and the panelists properly. Please could I also ask you to leave the headsets behind when you leave so that there's a full set of headsets for the next group of speakers and panelists and audience. And good morning to all of you. Good afternoon and good evening to those of you who may be joining us later in the day online. Here we are in Baku at COP29. We're being live streamed, so if everyone in the audience knows that, please don't, the camera is there, please try not to get up and create a lot of movement because this is being live streamed. Anyway, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of you, and welcome to the conversation about a year after the charter, 1 year on from getting ahead of disasters, the charter that was signed and endorsed by COP28 1 year ago. A very warm welcome to all of you. This event's being convened by the Risk-Informed Early Action Partnership, or REAP, at the ODI Global Pavilion, Peace and Transboundary Resilience. And there's a reason why we're holding it at this pavilion, and I'll get to that in a second. So my name is Christina Bennett. I'm the CEO of START Network. START Network is a network of 140 local, national, and international NGOs trying to change the way that aid is delivered. We operate across 6 continents, delivering humanitarian assistance. And we have an excellent lineup of speakers for you here today. I will introduce them to you one by one as they speak, but before we get started on the speakers, I wanted to first pass over to Ambassador Lutero. Ambassador Lutero is the permanent representative of Samoa to the United Nations in New York. He is also the current chair of AOSIS, which is the Alliance of Small Island States, and he's also a co-chair on the REAP governing board. So, welcome, and you have the floor.
Good morning. Is it on? This is on. Okay. Good morning, everyone. Honorable ministers, excellencies, and friends of RIP. It's a pleasure to welcome you all to this very important and focused conversation. Certainly for the constituency that I represent, Small Island Development States. The key question I think that will be confronting us today is how can we continue to get ahead of disasters. About 12 months ago, a number of us gathered in Dubai at COP28 to launch the Charter on Getting Ahead of Disasters. For those who were not involved in the process, the UAE, in its presidency, had approached our partnership with the intention of providing their support to increase ambition and scale of the early action agenda. As a partnership and through an extremely consultative process, we co-developed the 5 principles laid out in the Charter. First, as far as possible, getting ahead of hazards, not waiting for them to strike. Secondly, aligning our investment across climate, development, and humanitarian finance stream, and taking a holistic approach to risk management. Third, prearranging finance so that it is ready to be released quickly and efficiently. Fourth, strengthening money out systems so that resources can reach communities quickly, where possible, in advance of hazard. And finally, prioritizing national and local leadership. More anticipatory approaches must be locally led, not by international actors. Last year, over 40 government, intergovernmental bodies, and international partners endorsed the Charter, with the many making specific commitment as to how they were going to put these principles into action. This year, we will be hearing from various partners on how they have been starting to put the high-level principles into practice on a day-to-day basis. Since COP28, there have been numerous relevant political processes, events, and initiatives, which I would mention just a few. Firstly, SITS4, which was hosted by Antigua and Barbuda in May of this year, and produced the Antigua and Barbuda agenda for SITS, where the issue of DRR has been prioritized for the coming decade. Secondly, Brazil has held this year's G20 presidency and produced the first ever G20 ministerial declaration on disaster risk reduction, which include numerous references to strengthening early warning and early action. As small states, we push hard to ensure the Summit of the Future and its declarations included the importance of DRR. Without these investments now, our future generations will struggle to survive. The high-level panel on closing the crisis protection gap, on which both Daniel and Nina, presently with us today, sits, has been convening and consolidating findings and recommendations on pre-arranging finance. As far as Samoa is concerned, some of you will be aware that we hosted the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting last month. And the major outcome of that meeting in terms of the communique was to focus on resilient economy to combat climate change, resilient economies to support recovery and prosperity for members of the Commonwealth family, and thirdly, resilient societies that empowers people, especially women and youth, for peaceful and productive lives. All of these positive momentum, nevertheless, there is still much more work to do to turn political will into tangible action on the ground. Let us therefore hear some examples from partners so that we can draw inspiration for the year ahead and continue to make progress in getting ahead of disasters. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Lutero, for reminding us about the core principles in the Charter, for bringing us up to date on what's happened in the year since it was launched, but also reminding us that we need to draw inspiration from these initiatives, from what's actually happening on the ground, to put those principles of the Charter into practice. And that's where we bring ourselves to today, because that's exactly what this panel is about, how the Charter is being implemented. So let me first introduce my first speaker. He is a good friend and colleague. Samiullah Hamidi is the Director General of the Organization for Social and Economic Development in Afghanistan. He's actually START Network's representative of our regional hub in Afghanistan. And he's going to talk to us a little bit about what's happening in Afghanistan these days in the terms of the disasters and the challenges those present. So, Sam, question to you. Could you tell us about Afghanistan, some of the challenges that have made it difficult to act ahead of disasters in the past, and what's happening now?
I hope I'm audible. Hi, my name is Samiullah Hamidi, but if you run into me later, call me Sami, because that's easy for people. Thank you, Christina. I think I will start by saying, in the context of climate change, Afghanistan is a country that lies in the intersection between like a really long, protracted crisis, a humanitarian crisis that started 4 years back, and that intersection is creating an incredible, a really extreme, severe humanitarian situation that is deepening day by day, and that intersection is not only creating more humanitarian, it's that anyway, I think I will just. I think what's happening in Afghanistan is more and more serious floods and incredible impact on human livelihoods, and I think what's more worrying is that the current system in place is not fit to meet these needs and to meet the crises that are created by the severe climate change. That and that puts Afghanistan in and again, Afghanistan is still fourth all climate disaster and other hazards that are created with climate. And in 2023, we projected that Afghanistan would, like half of its population was in need of humanitarian assistance. And that need is deepening because of the way we respond or the way the humanitarian system reacts. And I would like to also point out the unfitness of the current approach and how unfit for purpose the current humanitarian approach is to meeting these crises. Because these crises are, in a way, evolving, shifting in that dynamic between a very severe economic decline and a very loss of the ability of communities. And that impacts the resilience of both the communities and also the system not evolving or not shifting fast enough to meet those needs. And that is where I think where Afghanistan is being put, where it's not only severe crises, climate-related hazards and crises, it's also the way the humanitarian system is not evolving. It's not transitioning from emergency to more permanent solutions. And I think that's deepening poverty and creating more and more humanitarian needs.
Thank you, Tammy. So you've painted a picture of a country in crisis. High levels. You said half the population is in need of humanitarian assistance. You've talked about a crisis of resilience where communities aren't able to cope. And you've talked about a system that isn't fit for purpose for the long-term needs that Afghanistan has. Is there more possibility now for anticipatory action, for preempting and prepositioning finance to protect Afghan communities rather than simply respond to their needs?
I think we have ample evidence to prove that the current system is not working. It's completely broken because there is enough time that lapsed where the system could have moved from being a relief and emergency response to more a proactive. And I think there is overwhelming evidence and consensus and recognition that we need more proactive, early, anticipatory action. We need more involvement of communities. And I think the way we're seeing anticipatory action taking root, and we not only see it in the mindsets and the shift in the discourse around early action, and we see increasingly it's taking shape in the form of hubs, local, international NGOs coming together, recognizing involvement of communities. We're seeing an example will be the Afghanistan Humanitarian Hub, where the conversation is more on how and why the idea of anticipatory action is is not only incubated in words and ideas, it's actually put into action. And it's shaping policies of local organizations, it's shaping policies of international NGOs, and we're seeing increased cooperation among local and international NGOs. And that increased cooperation is leading to increased collaborative action. And that collaborative action is putting communities and people at the center. And I think that build off of consensus is going to be the future. And that's how system change and how the system will become more fit for purpose. And we're already seeing it, and we're well on our way in doing it.
Thanks, Sami. Maybe just one more question to you. You've mentioned, you come from a local organization. You're representing local civil society in Afghanistan. You've mentioned the importance of involving civil society and local civil society in all of these conversations. Why? Why is that so important?
In our experience in dealing with crises, climate-related disasters, earthquakes, floods, landslides, and severe drought, we have seen communities being the frontline responders, always. They're the first responders. And that's, I sit here and I find myself to be a facilitator, even though I'm a local organization, but I'm still not proximate enough to the problem. And my motivation will, even though really genuine, but it's not like I don't feel the pain that the communities do, and I think they are the perfect first responders. And their involvement into both the decision making and also implementation, leadership, is absolutely key. And I've seen myself increasingly retreating to a role of being a facilitator and letting the communities lead, because ultimately they take over. And no matter how close I was or our team were to a crisis, when we got to that event where there was an earthquake, we saw the people that survived the crisis with shovels and trying to divert a flood, or whether it was helping those who survived an earthquake. And I think that proves that we are, as a local organization, we play a very specific function. We can't complete the whole cycle. And I also see that the problems are very complex, the crises are incredibly complex. And without a very networked, grassroots, and community-based approach, the cycle will not be complete. And no one organization has the capacity or resources to do the work and the scale-up needs that needs to be met. And I think communities are basically the natural leaders when it comes to response and making that response. And I think bringing back a process of community development to meeting crisis durably and creating durable solutions. And I think bringing back that process and letting people lead the process and let us be local and international NGO be the facilitators of that process.
Thanks very much, Sami. What I'm hearing from you is that local civil society communities are part of the hope that we all have for your country. So I hope that all works out for Afghanistan and all of the hazards that you're facing. And while the hub in Afghanistan is still quite nascent for START Network, we've also done very similar work in places like Madagascar and Bangladesh. So please, if you have any questions about how this works at START Network, please see me or other members of START Network after the session or beyond. Please check out our work on our website. Thanks very much, Sami.
Is that the last one?
That's the last one,
Yeah.
yes. I'd like to now move to our second speaker, who is going to represent the context of Nepal. And as we know from the recent flooding in Nepal, it's a country that faces recurrent disasters over and over and over again, and very much is at the center of some of the work that we're all doing on this. Just to note that we have here Mr. Anil Pokhrel, who's the CEO of the National Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Authority of the Government of Nepal. A side note, we were meant to have a representative from the government of Somalia here on the panel today. He was unable to make it to Baku. His flight was canceled, so Mr. Pokhrel has been able to step in at the last minute for us. So thanks very much to you for doing that. Maybe just a question to you. The government of Nepal has been shifting to more anticipatory approaches for a while now, for several years, in order to get ahead of the disasters that are facing you all the time. Can you talk to us specifically about some of those recent developments? How you, in the National Disaster Risk Reduction Management Authority, have managed to make this shift from being a sector that's traditionally reactive to being one that's much more proactive?
Thank you, Christina. I'd like to again take you all eastwards from Sammy's place. Drive around 200 kilometers eastward, you're going to reach Kathmandu, and that's where I come from. Similar disaster riskscape, floods, landslides, all you name it, exactly similar. But what we have is pretty much of a success story to tell with you all. It was in COP26 where we officially signed the REAP partnership that actually kind of really opened up avenues for us to really take towards a more proactive approach. So in the RMA, my office had just recently been established under using a disaster risk reduction and management law. This has come out in 2015, and so this allowed us an avenue with this signing of this REAP partnership allows us to really think as how would we really transform the way we do humanitarian actions. And so this is where, again, NDRMA, my office really put together a collegium of, again, NGOs and INGOs together to work along these lines. So we have we've in the last 3 years, we've hosted 3 national dialogues to really take this idea ahead, especially discussing, learning from other country experiences, but also, again, working with the REAP Secretariat, learning from other country experiences, also building on our last 10, 15 years of experience. How do you really look at humanitarian response in a more structured and a more organized way? So this has really been a transformational point, COP26 onwards. And so from being a very reactive approach to a very proactive approach that we've seen. We've also seen a mixed success in our own experiences. Again, if you really look into this year's monsoon, again, this was 125 days starting from June until October. What we saw is 3 major signature events that is a telling story of what we're going through. The first one is a success story where we've ever recorded the highest amount of rainfall of 624 millimeters. So think of 600 liters in a tank of 1,000 liter tank, and that was the amount of water falling overnight. It was really kind of raining cats and dogs. We've lost massive amount of infrastructures, irrigation, houses, hospitals, and everything. But we were able to tell 3 days in advance. So we've, again, let loose all our response capacities and preparedness, including volunteers. So fortunately, not a single person was lost during this particular disaster. So really a strong story to tell. This was in a case of West Nepal, Kanchanpur district. And so, but again, there's another case where, again, very recently, September end, 28 and 29 September, this is where, again, we're able to forecast in advance at least 3 days in advance, but we're not able to cater or design our risk communications in a way that, again, we could have perhaps saved enough lives. We lost 250 people in this particular event, still missing another 18 people. But what I see is, still a story, though we missed 250 people, 260 people in this 2 days event. What we see is this event has happened after 55 years, such a high amount of rainfall. That too happening in the middle of Kathmandu, the capital city, and its outskirts areas. So this notion of, again, having floods and landslides, that it only impacts your far-off remote areas is a thing of the past. Again, with climate change, we're experiencing these kind of disasters even in the heart of the city where we've never experienced such kind of disasters. So I think this is where we've kind of utterly learned and experienced is how do we better do in terms of catering risk communications even to urban societies, and you really trigger actions. So that's where we could learn something. I see it still in a positive way because, again, of something similar incident back in 1993, we've lost 1,290 people on a similar kind of instances. So this year, again, if you really look at it on a positive side, we've only lost 268 people. So that's the jump that we've been able to make. But still, again, there's so much to do, especially in terms of, again, using our, again, advanced forecast systems, advanced or observation systems that we've been able to do it in the last 5-6 years. How do you really, again, tell the impact stories? How do you really trigger accents into these communities? And it's not only government, it's not only the NDRMA, but also how do you really, again, really energize all the sectors of society, again, NGOs and INGOs, volunteers, youths, and everyone. So that's still a challenge that we're still confronting with. Going forward, again, we've also, again, COP29, I'd also want to announce that we've established an anticipatory action clinic housed within NDRMA office. So this allows, again, under the leadership of NDRMA, to work with multiple actors, UN agencies, NGOs and INGOs, to work together, come up with solutions, have ideas, discuss together. We've been really reached out, again, this year, this week, actually tomorrow, we've been reached out by a couple of INGOs to ask for our support to help them guide on the basic concepts of anticipatory action. How do you really, again, graduate from being from a reactive to a proactive way? And so this is how we're trying to create a collegium. And so this is a storyline that we would like to kind of share with you all, especially since COP26 coming up to here.
Great, thank you, Anil, for that. You know, you are also a member of the REAP governing board. And REAP, as you know, is a multi-stakeholder partnership of people in this room, people that are watching us online, many stakeholders across the system. What you've described is a situation of climate hazards and their impacts that are somewhat predictable, and you're working on this anticipatory action clinic, which is fantastic to see. But there are also always going to be impacts on society, also impacts on people. What can you tell the REAP partnership right now about what you need from others to be able to not only promote anticipatory action, acting ahead, protecting people from these floods, but also responding to them? Because not all of this is going to be manageable by anticipatory action.
Absolutely. Again, so if you really look at our governance landscape, we have four levels of governance. We have the municipal governments taking a lead on the ground, but we have district level administrative offices, we have the provincial governments, and ourselves representing the federal agencies. Bringing all them together is not an easy task. It's easier said than done. But also we really, again, we need to work with, again, various partners, civil society actors, the youths, the children, as how do you kind of, again, really get towards that agenda. What we've learned from our experience is that, again, having a framework at a national level that brings in all these set of actors into a common framework has been really helpful. We're working on few critical guidelines. Say, for instance, two critical guidelines that we're working right now about to almost complete is a multi-hazard risk assessment guideline and a multi-hazard early warning system guideline that caters for different kind of hazards. So instead of, again, us doing it all by ourselves, our whole framework is guided by how do you work as a whole society, how do you work with governments, how do you work with various ministries and departments across all these four levels of governance, but also NGOs and INGOs, but also private sector. And so that's where we're trying to take this framework in these lines. There are three other guidelines that we've just recently endorsed through an executive order that really helps us enable to take these kind of ideas forward. One of such is a volunteer formation and operationalization guideline. And so across the whole country, again, volunteers been trained in the past, but no MIS system, no ways to really kind of, again, manage them. So we've again structured the volunteer management system across all these four levels. And so the municipal governments or the mayors really taking the lead in terms of command and control, mobilizing at the volunteers. And so this is how we created networks across provinces and at the national level. So we know, again, how we've now developed a system to track volunteers. And so in times of need, we could kind of mobilize from place A to place B. And so that's an area that we've just recently come up. We've also designed a Godam system, Godown as a word, warehouse. But we've taken that as a construct in an information management system. So where we use local governments, we train them, have embedded staff through NGOs and INGOs embedded within the municipal warehouses, so that they track, again, what's come in, what's go out. So we really understand, again, what's the inventory behind it. And so this is, again, done through a structured way of doing things, coming up with a guideline. And so the data sets are, again, being put up by youths and volunteers into a national disaster management information system. So mobilizing youths has been very successful story for us. So that's how, again, working with NAS, so using these examples, we are actually working with this year, and so hopefully by the upcoming COP, we should have a national anticipatory action framework So this framework would, again, build on these guidelines and these ways of working. We'd want to, again, continue, again, having these set of national dialogues, regional dialogues. We hosted one in Kathmandu last year. So building on these lessons from other countries around the world, there might be, again, not so good stories, say, for instance, Afghanistan, but there might be snippets of, again, lessons from even so many countries around the world. That's where we're eager to learn from them and then work on coming up with this national anticipatory action framework. This is what we're trying to kind of work with the anticipatory action clinic and the support from REAP and to take it forward. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Anil, for describing in really, really concrete, detailed terms what this looks like in practice on the ground and what collective action looks like, because it's going to sort of take a whole of society approach to get all of this done. And that's where we need the support also of donors. That's where donors come in. So I'd like to pass now to our next panelist, if you could pass the microphone down, and welcome Minister Annalisa Dodds, who was appointed as Minister for Development in the UK for the UK's Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office just last July. Minister Dodds, can you... The UK was a very strong supporter of the Charter in the months leading up to it, and again at COP28 last year. Could you tell us a little bit about progress in key commitments related to the Charter from the UK's perspective?
I'd be delighted to, and it's so wonderful to be part of this important discussion and a real privilege to be with these very impressive other speakers on the panel. As was mentioned, I'm the UK's new Development Minister, also Minister for Women and Equalities as well. And we're really getting on with making sure that we modernise our approach to international development in the UK, that we develop genuine partnerships with countries in the Global South with climate and nature at the heart of our approach, and indeed as part of that anticipatory action and climate resilience. We know that the world's poorest and most vulnerable people are those who are bearing the brunt of the climate crisis, and of course they were the ones who had so little to do with its creation in the first place. So we really do need to get better at preventing the kind of disasters we're seeing increasingly frequently hitting many of those people. We were really delighted that the UK was part of creating that charter. We think it's very clear from all the evidence, and indeed we've heard about this already on the panel, that when we can act earlier to make sure support systems are in place, that they're far more effective when it comes to the impact of livelihood and life-damaging disasters. So we were pleased to endorse the Charter from the start as the UK. Also, we continue to fund the unique and effective risk-informed early action partnership. And I'm really grateful to the REAP Secretariat for everything that they've been doing in this regard. The UK co-chairs the board of the partnership along with Ambassador Lutero, and so delighted we're having that interaction with Samoa in his capacity as the chair of the Alliance of Small Island States. And I do really want to recognise that leadership that has taken place from small island developing states and indeed the other nations that we've been hearing from, the Nepalese leadership, and that from civil society as well. Of course, we did see a great example of that, in fact, in the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting. We want to be making sure that we really catalyse some of the expertise and experience from the UK as well on some of these issues, both from government, but in fact from outside it as well. And that includes also working with our financial services sector. And mention was made of the private sector, quite rightly. We think we have to break down barriers to investment in this area and develop the innovative new tools that our partners need. That goes from guarantees, for example, through to insurance as well. We've got a moral imperative to be doing better at this, and we really want to work with all of you so that we can.
Great, that's really wonderful to hear, and thanks for reiterating the UK's support. You've also been championing this cause with the G20, and we very much appreciate that. Can you tell us, maybe give us some specificity on some of the key commitments, any progress that you've seen on the key commitments related to the Charter? You've mentioned also the private sector, insurance, financial services. Any examples from there as well? Thanks.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, thank you very much. And perhaps if I could focus on some of the examples from finance that we think are particularly important, because we hear the same message time and again from our partners that support has to be well targeted. It has to be available actually when it's needed. It needs to be responding to what communities on the ground say that they require. And if it isn't provided in that way, then it's not actually going to be supporting communities and enabling the recovery that's needed. And I think we all know the statistics here, particularly this expert audience and those on the panel will be aware that only 0.2% of all humanitarian funding is dedicated to anticipatory action. And so we are seeking to champion action, and thank you for your recognition of that. That's included through the G7 declaration to strengthen anticipation of shocks. Also our support for the World Food Programme as well, and some of the work they're doing on anticipatory cash transfers, which we've seen being used in different countries effectively, for example, in Ethiopia, where we're seeing, of course, droughts becoming much more frequent, unfortunately, where we need to have that anticipatory action. But we also know that when it comes to crisis financing as well, just 1.1% is actually arranged in advance. And even tinier percentages go into the lowest income countries. So we do champion disaster risk finance as an important form of climate finance. That needs to include for droughts, floods and cyclones through, for example, regional insurance schemes. And alongside African countries and our wider partners, we set up the African risk capacity. We think ARC has been really important. It's paid out about $62 million to vulnerable countries, which has been very important when it comes to responding to some of the awful droughts that we've seen, for example, in Malawi. We've also focused on building resilience to hurricanes and floods in the Caribbean. So Hurricane Beryl, which is, people here will know, came earlier and it was stronger. We're seeing that happen time and again now. We were really pleased to see that some of the insurance mechanisms that had been set up, including with UK support, were drawn on as part of that. One example was Grenada, for example. So they received a $55 million payout from the Caribbean Regional Risk Pool, and they were actually able to access that support when they needed it for once. That hasn't always been the way. Our Prime Minister has been supporting this as well, and our Met Office too. And again, that point about external expertise, we're seeking to work with those experts in the Met Office so that the kind of information that they're able to access around weather patterns can be made available to those who need it. Everyone from female farmers in the Sahel, for example, to people working on community-run forecasting in Kenya. And very, very quickly, if I may just finally, I'm really delighted to be able to announce today that we are going to be supporting that work further with a further £30 million commitment for the UK's work dedicated to improving climate, weather and information and preparedness across Africa. That's building on other work that we've undertaken across Asia Pacific and the Middle East and Africa through the UK Met Office's WISER programme. So hopefully WISER in its impact as well, really intensifying that work. We really want to be operating with all of you as partners to drive this forward for the sake of those communities who are right at the brunt of the climate crisis at the moment.
Wonderful. Thanks very much, Minister Dodds. And thank you for your announcement here of the £30 million for implementing for climate in Africa, I believe it was for. And there was a lot of enthusiasm for your remarks next door in one of the pavilions. I don't know if those in the audience could hear that, but a lot of shouting across the hall here. Okay, wonderful. Thanks very much for that. You've heard the minister talk about the importance of prearranged finance and some of the effects it can have, the positive impacts it could have in countries that are affected by climate hazards. I want to now turn to our next speaker, who is a bit of an expert on prearranged finance. His name is Dan Lund. He is a member of the which is an initiative of the special advisor to the Fijian government when it comes to climate change finance, and he's also is a representative on the loss and damage board of that fund. So, Dan, you are a bit of an expert on all of this. Principle 3 of the Charter in particular focuses on prearranged finance. Can you tell us a little bit about what that high-level panel is discussing that you're on, and what some of its main findings are around prearranged finance this year? We heard from Minister Dodds that there are very low levels of prearranged finance when you're considering the entire sort of aid package. What do you see from your perspective?
Yeah, thank you very much, Christina, and appreciate this opportunity to, get out of the kind of procedural discussions of the negotiation rooms and discuss something real. It's very nice to be here with you, and I'm very happy to introduce the work of the high-level panel on closing the crisis protection gap, and I think. Basically, this panel is really premised on the understanding that there are some real flaws in the way that finance is flowing to support disasters, whether it be the aggregate kind of deficit in the amount that's flowing, but also the way in which that flows and the types of challenges that actually the disastrous financing that we have in place and the different products, the degree to which they can cover the range of issues and challenges that society faces. So I think the panel, and one of the benefits of the way this panel operates is it's not linked to a specific agenda or a specific agreement or a specific type of product. It's really a diverse, geographically spread grouping of financiers, policy experts, representatives of international organizations that are really there to look at what that challenge is, think about how crisis protection and financing around it can evolve with the threats that we face. So it is really rethink the overall quality and quantity and accessibility of financing given the changing disaster and climate change crisis sort of paradigm that we now exist within. So really one of the challenges is, as Minister Dodds had very rightly said, a huge amount of the way that we respond to disasters is reactive. 1.1% of the financing for disasters being ready to go, preempting these issues, and that has a kind of conceptual disconnect with the fact that we have many countries that know that there's a disaster in store for them. In the Pacific, we have seen multiple times over a 24-hour period, 35% of GDP wiped out overnight. And we know that these disasters will continue. We know that the exposure still exists. We know the vulnerability still exists. So ensuring that this reactive posture can be changed really needs us to ensure that we actually have the kind of financial mechanisms, the national systems evolved to be able to deliver this support. And I think many of the panelists have already sort of validated some of the key findings that the panel is discussing at the moment in the lead up to launching a report in January that is there to really try to unpack what some of these reforms and approaches could be, looking at it from a sort of broad overarching perspective of what does disaster risk financing look like into the next decades and moving forward. So I think as Sammy had discussed about national systems not being fit for purpose, how do we make sure finance incentivizes those systems to become fit for purpose? Or Anil, you had discussed basically the success when government has been able to be closer involved with local actors. How do we formalize those relationships? And then there's the raw financing of where is the financing sitting, as Minister Dodds had mentioned, around that small percentage that is pre-prepared for disasters that we are all but expecting. And so I think these are really key issues. The other thing that's really important, and it's not just about the amount of finance, of course. It's also about really understanding what we're responding to. And I think a good example, and this would be an example in the Pacific, but I think it would be an example in many cases, is that some of the metrics that we use to understand disasters are somewhat simplistic. We could say if a wind speed hits this amount, we correlate that with more damage. But in a climate crisis world, there are many other factors we need to take into account. If a country has been in drought for 6 months, and there's a heavy rainfall event, there's a much greater risk that there's going to be flooding. So in many cases, we can't just look at certain metrics. We need to look at a more of a diversified kind of context-specific range of factors when we're looking at these triggers or pre-preparedness. In some cases, a Category 4 cyclone might have similar impact to a Category 2 cyclone if some of those pre-existing factors are there. It's also the linearity of the disaster cycle that is often part of the narrative on disaster risk reduction. Preparedness, response, recovery. This linearity is breaking down very much, I think, especially in countries in the Pacific, where a lot of the time we're preparing, responding, and reconstructing all at the same time, and that increases sort of the vulnerability and changes the kind of context in which we need to look at response and look at the instruments. So these are some of the findings that I think have been important and will be further articulated in the report that will be released in January.
Thanks, Dan. We look forward to that report. When is it all coming out?
I think it's anticipated to be available in January.
See, as an anticipation person, that's great that you're anticipating that coming out. But maybe just a follow-up question. You've talked about access to finance, both in terms of its levels, which is something that we're all concerned with, but also its accessibility by the right people. How do we get that finance to the right people at the right time? You've talked a little bit about the metrics not necessarily being fit for purpose, but what are some of the other challenges, and what can the Charter do to promote the right ways of getting those funds to the right people at the right time?
Yeah, I think when we look at the existing financing paradigm, I think there's a need to recognize that many of these instruments are quite top-down. There can be certain instruments that are offered by development banks that are essentially a template that is passed between countries, and those that want to purchase the project or sign up to the product, they're able to do so. But we need to really look at what the bottom-up approach looks like to ensure that what we're planning for and how that finance will be deployed is really informed by the context rather than retrofitted to the context. And I think, as we've heard, there's really a need to improve that localized information and data, but what we do with that data is we actually need to be able to implement changes to products or diversify the offerings. So when it comes to national systems, we know that the national actors are front and center for dealing with shocks and dealing with disasters. And I think an important concept that's been talked about quite often within the board for responding to loss and damage has been this concept of subsidiarity, or the idea that you need to deal with things at the level at which they exist and as close to the issue as possible. And so devolving some of the way in which finance is used needs to be designed from the beginning. So if we look at a contingent financing arrangement, maybe we should be looking at a certain percentage of funds that needs to go to communities. And in putting that requirement in, it incentivizes and forces forward the effort on the ground to develop a disbursement mechanism to make sure that it goes into the hands of people. We heard from Minister Dodds about cash transfer. Cash transfer is something that in the past has been seen as, it's difficult to know how the funds will be used, but there's been a lot of new use of financial technology, etc., that means that this can be extremely efficient and effective, getting it to the people who can actually deal with that issue directly. And in many ways, getting funding directly to the individuals affected, it takes a lot of the burden off the government to be able to actually get that finance to them through other channels. So using financial technology, requiring there to be a level of social protection built into the way these instruments are used, on top of the traditional need to inject liquidity into a system responding to an event or a sort of shock response is important. So we need to look at a more multifaceted use and multifaceted array of products, but ensuring that it's a bottom-up approach that defines them.
Wonderful, Dan. Thanks very much for that. And we appreciate your work on the Loss and Damage Fund, exactly to be infusing it with that principle of subsidiarity and bottom-up approaches. So thanks for your work on that. Get that fund moving. Let's get it going. So we've been talking with Minister Dodds and also Dan about money in. How do we source the financing, and how do we make sure it's doing the right things at the right time? But then there's the question of money out. How do we channel those resources to the right people at the right time, using the channels that are going to be most effective? So for that, I'd like to introduce Ms. Sylvie Wubbs, who is an agronomist and resilience advisor with the UN's Food and Agriculture Organization. And FAO has been supporting the push for more anticipatory approaches for some time. You're, in fact, a leader in all of this. And now the seeds of change stories that we're hearing from FAO are about sort of how that you're putting this into practice at FAO and how the Charter is helping you do that. So maybe, Sylvie, could you talk to us a little bit about how this money gets out and to the right people? first, maybe why did FAO endorse the charter in the first place, and how are you organizing those principles in the charter in order to get the money out to the right people at the right time?
Thank you. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be with you all. I'm an agronomist. I'm also practicing producing food for my own family, so I'm trying to really make it as grounded as possible, and it's really good to hear what has been shared by our distinguished panel. I'd like to bring the anticipatory action fundamental work for the agri-food systems. So for agriculture and food, knowing that we have 4 billion people involved in agri-food systems, and we have certainly 2 billion people involved in food production, people and their families, not just smallholder farmers. And many of these people, sometimes 70 to 80% of these people are, it's their livelihoods is moved in most fragile, vulnerable countries, and, some of which we define. So it's not just one sector, it's a fundamental sectors for livelihoods, income, food, and well-being of so many people. And as it was mentioned, the system is not fit for purpose. Not only humanitarian, even development is not risk-informed, is not addressing the risk before the event is happening. And this is where the anticipatory action and the whole narrative, the whole mindset of anticipating, thinking ahead is so fundamental. And this is at core of our FAO work in emergency and resilience, especially in food crisis countries, because we have acute food insecurity, which is still increasing. We have about 282 million people suffering for acute hunger. That means they don't even have one meal per day. And these people are the lead agents for building the resilience, for not only responding, but anticipating and acting upon risks and impacts that really makes them suffer. So this is really at the core of our mandate, both humanitarian and development across the agri-food system. So it's not only producing food, but it's also processing food, transporting food, the whole value chain around food. So the work of the Charter is fully in line with what we've been already doing in terms of resilience, which is really looking at the prevention, the anticipation, absorption, but also adaptation. And that's the big word in the climate area, adaptation. We use a lot resilience, but that's the risk entry point. So what is really the Charter and the REAP is really helping, shifting this mindset, not only about the humanitarian, but also in the finance and the development actors. That is bringing us together on what is very much needed is this better understanding, this better narrative of all hands on deck to address this multifaceted poly-crisis that we're facing, not only climate crisis, biodiversity crisis, land degradation crisis, water crisis, and so on, the health, which has been through it. But that overall result is in this growing food insecurity of really millions of people. That's not going to get better if we don't address these systems of anticipating, preventing, reducing risks ahead of these disasters. So this is just fully online, and we're very happy to continue supporting the REAP and the Charter as part of our work, looking especially in these fragile settings where conflict and climate have this lethal mix of driving very acute food insecurity. So we're making it in our work, serving especially those countries. More than 20% of our humanitarian action, we want it to be funded for anticipatory action. That's just a target. We're not getting there yet.
Yeah.
It's difficult. There is some protocol, there's a mechanism, there's capacity, especially to be built at national and local level. And united together, I think we can, really progress on that. We have responded. We are active in more than 20 countries, especially also with the La Nina crisis, where really climate extremes have been accentuated, aggravated. Making progress at the same time, the danger is not to work in silo. It's not anticipatory action alone. It's anticipatory action as a portfolio, as a pivotal game changer in the multiple climate and disaster solutions that I needed. The early warning for all, and these early warnings that are actionable, of course it goes together, but also with the cash, the social protection, the insurance, nature-based solution, and many of these other solutions that we hear, but which are still fragmented. So looking forward to have this partnership and this charter to still help us to move on restructuring the systems on this preventative and anticipative way, especially for agri-food system, but for other systems too.
Thank you for that, Sylvie. You mentioned that you reiterated the fact that anticipatory action is just a tool in a much wider toolbox. That includes response, that includes social protection, that includes insurance, and that includes just basic development, which I think we all need to continue doing for this to work. But maybe, you've got these seeds of change stories on your website, and I believe on the REAP website, so I encourage everybody to check them out. These are stories of change, which is fantastic, but you've just described growing food insecurity. So what is the disconnect between what we want to see, these seeds of change, which are just green shoots, and wholesale change, which is what we're all after?
Well, first of all, there is a question of scale. These are still too little compared to the needs that we have out there. And we cannot do it alone. And I think this is very much at the heart of the humanitarian development and peace nexus, especially in these fragile settings. There's still too much fragmentation. There's competition for resources, the competition for mandate, the competition for visibility on the success. That is coming to the detriment of the result on the ground. I mean, I'm talking here among agencies, of course, but I think the local action and leadership that we've heard, that is the one, the leaders. So the key is to empower the local actors and the national authorities in institutionalizing these anticipatory action protocol and mechanism, and linking it, we've heard very well, linking it to the emergency response. We are not there yet, and so it's lacking the resources, and it's lacking the sort of synergies, that understanding that we need all hands on deck to bring in. I'm happy to hear it's not only climate shocks and stresses, it's all these other shocks, earthquakes, and also conflicts that are really impacting on people. And this sense of togetherness with the level of crisis that we're facing, it seems that there's still a lack of understanding of the gravity and the little time that we have to really turn the tide on. I will say what Brazil is saying, turn the tide on deforestation, but I think it's turn the tide on human suffering, and in this case, food insecurity. So I would say institutional anchoring the anticipatory action into existing climate, disaster, humanitarian peace work, and shaping the finance, making sure to reach the local actors, so that it's really a bottom-up approach that is driving the solutions, and being part of this common narrative and action for scale, so that it's defragmented to the maximum, so that it's not only a language that we have for agriculture and food, but it's also for the water system, for the urban systems, energy, and some of these critical systems that we need for our well-being.
Wonderful, Sylvie. Thank you for that, wrapping that up for us. Institutions, scaling finance, bottom-up approaches through local organizations, all of that really important. I think really common themes of what we've heard across the entire panel. So thanks. I don't think we necessarily have time for questions. Do you want to take a few, or should we go straight to? Okay, maybe one or two questions to our panelists before we have a closing endorsement and closing remarks. please just signal and we'll get the microphone to you. No, it's hard to talk with them on, so I would.
Does this work? Sorry, it's confusing. Thanks so much. I'm Sophie Powell from Christian Aid, and thanks so much to all of the panelists for a great series of interventions. We're big fans of the REAP network and members of the START network, and it's been great to hear from you all. I just wondered whether bringing it back to the negotiations here, and given what's been said about obviously the strong connections to adaptation and loss and damage, and all of this is sort of different ways of, it's different language, but basically it's about adaptation and loss and damage. I just wonder what the panelists feel about the negotiations taking place at the moment, and the real call from G77 countries for more public finance to be made available for adaptation and loss and damage. And if you have any quick thoughts about how all of that is going and what you would want to see.
Thanks very much. Anyone like to take that question? Just signal that you would like to. Minister Dodds?
Yeah, thank you very much. I mean, I think this really is very important when it comes to that partnership that is so important between countries like the UK and the Global South. We need to listen really to those calls, especially for adaptation-related support. And I kind of would link this to the point that was just made. I mean, this isn't something that needs to happen in the future. It's required right now when you've got the same communities, just as was mentioned before, who are subject to drought in the dry season and then being flooded in the rainy season, and that happening repeatedly. So certainly the UK is seeking to be very well aware of this. In terms of exactly the role of this within the negotiations, I don't think that would be a wise thing for a politician to pontificate about at this stage, but certainly from the UK's perspective, we're really seeking to do what we can to be working with, particularly with Global South countries, making sure that we're pulling together, because just as we need to be taking action on this in the way that we've just talked about in some of those countries under stress, we're seeing this hitting, of course, countries like the UK as well. It's something that we really are all in together to use that phrase in its appropriate context. Those from the UK will know why that phrase has sometimes been contested, but it really is very, very relevant now. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Minister. Dan, I'm going to put you on the spot as sort of an insider on the loss and damage discussions. What are your hopes for the negotiations currently about the new goal?
Yeah, so I think a big one thing that's very important is making sure the arrangements that have been set up very recently to better integrate attention to loss and damage within and under the Paris Agreement, that we set them up in a way that means that they can address that fit for purpose need. So whether it be the fund itself or the Santiago Network on loss and damage, or the guidance given to the Warsaw International Mechanism, we need to make sure that we've evolved the way that we approach what is essentially new architecture to deal with these issues. Within that, it's very important that we see the linkage between loss and damage and adaptation. I think if we are often seeing that the ability to actually engage realistically in long-term resilience building, to invest in the kind of adaptation that we need to do, there is an underlying issue of loss and damage that needs to be addressed. And too often we're seeing the limited public resources available diverted towards dealing with short-term loss and damage needs or long-term loss and damage needs, and that actually takes away the ability to build the resilience that prevents loss and damage from being exacerbated in the future. So that connectivity between mitigation, adaptation, loss and damage to us is incredibly important, because it completes the kind of conceptual cycle of understanding of how these issues are related. And within the context of the NCQG, it's very important that we are clarifying where this loss and damage basically commitment is, to be able to kind of stabilize this picture between adaptation, loss and damage, adaptation, mitigation, and the loss and damage that is being, affecting both of those objectives here and now and into the future.
Thanks very much, Dan, and thanks for your question. I'd like to now recognize Lotu Palu, who's the CEO of Pickrick. The Pacific Catastrophe Risk Insurance Facility. Absolutely. Why don't you come up?
Thank you. Can you hear me? Okay. Thank you, Christina, for giving me this opportunity to.
It's on.
Is it on? Okay. Thank you, Christina, for giving me the floor. And our excellent panelists. I know we are running out of time, but I don't want to belittle the importance of the conversation that we are having here with Dusty's panel that we have on the floor.
Out of the way.
Yeah? Okay. Okay. There are two words that I've gathered from the conversation. One is availability and the other one is accessibility. And I think I'll start off with availability because that's related to why I'm here. In 2007, the Minister of Finance in the Pacific initiated or suggested to the World Bank to support us with some sort of an instrument within the disaster risk finance space. As a result, in 2013, they created a project they called PICRAFI, and that PICRAFI project gave birth on 2016 to establish this company, Pacific Catastrophe Risk Insurance Company, which received resources from 4 big countries in the world, UK. Thank you, Honourable Minister Todd, for your generosity in providing the resources, and also thank you for your Prime Minister for that announcement during CHOCAM of that additional capital investment will be giving to us. I don't know whether you're going to announce it now today or officially, but already announced it, so I know it's coming. So that's a good sign. Okay, so it's coming. And it's USA and Germany and Japan. And we have also, and this is a facility owned by the whole Pacific. And that was a response to a huge gap in the market. There is no private sector, no international institutions, or, I mean, there is international multilateral institutions, but no regional organization that provides such a financial protection gap to the countries in the Pacific immediately. So in the post-disaster situations, when it's come, I mean, there's availability in terms of establishing that organization. So now we being exist, we are providing a parametric insurance cover to the Pacific countries. And we started off with only 2 products, which is cyclone and earthquake and /tsunami. And now we are rolling out 2 new products for the coming years, which is flooding, which is excess rainfall, and also drought. So, and that's for the whole Pacific region. We are one of the 4 risk pools in the whole world. We are dealing with the Pacific. We are looking after the Pacific. The other one is ARC. I don't know whether you heard of Africa Risk Capacity. They deal with Africa. We are the same animal. You know, there are some commonalities, but in some common characteristics that in our business that we are doing, but at the same time, we are located in different regions. And also the CRIF, which is the Caribbean, and also the Sea Drift, that's for Southeast Asia. So, but we are focused on that. We are a specialized organization that we provide such a cover post-disaster. Now, with the new year, which is beginning of the new policy renewal that we started on the 1st of November this year, we redesigned our product from what was given to us by the World Bank back then. So to make it more transparent, make it more simple for our countries to really understand what we offer. One of the key messages was given to us was a lack of understanding of the technical service that we offer. We change it. We make it transparent. We make it simple for the countries to really understand. And that's where we are heading. At the same time, we also, that's linked to accessibility. Accessibility is also linked to the charter because that's important for us to change that mindset. And the charter that we are going to endorse today, which I'm happy to recognize also that I have my chair of the board here, Sarah Jane, while, you know, because without the guidance of the board, I may not be able to say that we endorse, management endorse the charter, because the charter for me, it's more like an instrument that strengthens the collaborations. Not only that, it's also give us some sort of a guidance of how to change the mindset in the Pacific. Insurance is not in the blood of the Pacific because they look at it as in terms of cost. It's not really an investment. So with the help of this instrument that we are endorsing today, it will help us change that mindset of the Pacific to think about, you know, like think about getting ahead of disaster. Think about putting aside some sort of financial resources. When a rain coming, be able to buy an umbrella for your children. So, and this is also related to building resilience and adaptation. It's all about enhancing the ability of the countries to respond quickly when a disaster strikes. And at the same time, we are changing also, we are currently designing the drought product for Tonga and follow up with other countries also. we are moving away from just providing financial immediate injections of cash post-disaster. We're also designing it to do it before as disaster strike. But as you know, it only works because of drought. I'm not a technical person to really explain it, but I have my technical expert here to explain it to you. But before any national declarations of a drought, we're going to make a portion of the payment to the particular countries. But the technical formations or development of that policy is currently underway with Tonga now. Potentially, that will also include other countries also. What we are having right now, I mean, initially what we were having is the cyclone and earthquake. That was more like blown to the South Pacific. On the north, no, it was not fitting for them. And that's the reason why it led us to create this flooding and also drought. So, Christina, I know I'm running out of time, but I wanted to also officially declare that we endorse the charter, and hopefully that we continue this cooperation going forward. This is just less than a year working with RIP. It was just a conversation informally started by Emma, and up to now we are formalizing something, and thank you for the support. I'm looking forward to this, using the convening power of RIP to be able to give us that visibility and ability to work with other regional organizations and international initiatives so that we can be able to do good things to the Pacific countries. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lotu, for endorsement of the charter. That's fantastic news. And thanks also for your explanation of what PICRIC is all about. As you said, insurance is not in the blood of the Pacific, but as we heard from our panel, it's an important tool in the disaster management toolbox. So thanks very much. I'd like now to turn to our closing speaker. I'd like to introduce Ms. Nena Stojkovic, I hope I got that right, who's the Undersecretary General for Global Relations, Humanitarian Diplomacy and Digitalization at the IFRC. Nena, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Christina. It is an incredible pleasure to join you here on the stage and also to listen to our fantastic panelists. While all of you provided different stakeholder perspective, you were all saying the same. You were reconfirming the importance of the charter and how we have to go ahead of the crisis. You also stated some of the progress that has been made and also how much more is needed. Financing will play a key part in that, especially prearranged financing, but it has to go into the right hands, and it goes also to your point on accessibility and availability. What I wanted to say on behalf of the largest humanitarian network in the world, International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies, with 16 million volunteers working in more than 200,000 communities in 191 countries, we absolutely endorse the charter, and we would like to walk the talk. We are also very proud of our relationship with RIP, and I really think that together we can make a significant progress. For us, climate action has to be locally led and people-centered. It has to happen in those communities that many of you talked about, especially Sammy and Adil, and we see that it is possible even in the humanitarian space, to innovate and get the funding to those communities who need it most and who are most vulnerable. And I just wanted to mention just very briefly, and Christina, you know these examples, 2 examples from my organization where we are able actually to do that. Our Disaster Response Emergency Fund, DREF, it supports about 80 national societies every year with around 100 million fast disbursing funds whenever a crisis happens, and we made sure that 25% of that is for anticipatory action, and we walk the talk on that commitment. We also walk the talk on innovation because we realize that grants are limited, and we ensured that 20% of that fund can be coming from the insurance payout. FCDO was one of the first who supported payment for premium. We got several like-minded donors and partners to believe that it's possible to buy insurance for the fund. For the first time in the humanitarian sector, we did it on an indemnity basis. It triggered in September, and now insurance is paying for DREF calls by the end of the year, and thank you for your support on that. So on the anticipatory action and insurance, we are proving that it's possible, and we would like to scale it up with partners elsewhere. And I also want you to say that we realize that it's not just anticipatory action in those same communities when those volunteers live way before the crisis. We need to build a long-term resilience, and we structured the Global Climate Resilience Platform for 100 most vulnerable countries in the world to climate, and we are raising 1 billion Swiss francs to support the work on early warnings, early action, shock responses, social protection, and nature-based solutions. So it is possible, and some progress is being made, but I think what our panelists also said, Christina and colleagues, is that more is needed. And I would like to mention a few things that come most prominently for me. I mean, one is we clearly have to scale up early action, and we have the early warnings for all initiative, but it has to go together with early action. Just warning communities about what's coming, while of course very important, is not going to be sufficient. That's why we need the action there at the community level, and we need the funding to go to the communities. I also think we collectively have to strengthen comprehensive risk management at the country level, from national governments, local governments. We have to embed and integrate disaster risk reduction into policies, laws, so that they are there to stick. And then, of course, Daniel, you talked about it, but several other panelists as well. We need to be better at prearranged financing for disasters. We need to add financial capacity that doesn't exist solely from grants, and innovating there and finding ways to come up with those financial instruments that can actually be prearranged. I think that's very important for all of us. And I wanted to say that we definitely need more signatories to the charter. I know that there are 40 of us who deeply believe in this. I actually think we should have many more. And I'm hoping with colleagues from REAP and all the panelists here, Christina, also your leadership, that we can get there between now and the next COP in 2025 in Brazil. We have ample opportunities through various engagements and working groups. And I really look forward to partnering together and making all that we were talking about today actually implemented. So again, it was a great pleasure to be part of this discussion. And Christina, I believe you should probably say a few words at the very, very end. Thank you very much. Thanks.
Thank you, Nena. So it seems to me that we're all sort of saying very similar things. Thanks for driving it home. Anticipatory action, to borrow your phrase, needs to be in our blood. It needs to be part of our mindsets. It needs to be part of our practice, but it also needs to be part of our system. And I think that's probably the hardest thing to change. But I just wanted to say a thank you for all of our excellent panelists, all of our speakers that joined us here today. Thanks to all of you listening here in the room. Thanks to everybody listening online. Please go ahead, endorse the charter, get your organization. If you want to know more about what that means, speak to REAP. They're here at COP, and they're always. It's a really important partnership because it involves everybody involved in this business to drive all of this forward. And then, you know, there are some stories on the REAP website, and I believe on the FAO website, about how things are actually changing. So tune into those for those practical ways that you can make a difference. And maybe a quick plug for Start Network. We've also got stories of change too. So thanks very much all for listening and for being a part of this, and thanks to our speakers.